Today we're in Galatians chapter 4, and Paul is going to continue to try to explain to the Galatians these deep spiritual truths that are really pretty simple, that we're saved by faith. We're not saved by keeping the law. And so he's going to try to explain it this way. He said, this is the way that it was with us before Christ came. We were like children. We were slaves to the basic spiritual principles of this world. But Jesus came, it says, at the right time. God sent his son, born of a woman, subject to the law, and God sent him, Jesus, to buy freedom for us who were slaves to the law, so that he could adopt us as his very own children. And because we are his children, God has sent the Spirit of his Son into our hearts, prompting us to call out, Abba, Father, or Daddy, Father. So this is all so relational. The language is so relational. He says, look, you have a relationship with God because God loves you and because Jesus did this work on the cross for you. It's not this sort of institutional kind of religion that Judaism had become. It was very relational. It was very personal. It was all about Jesus Christ. And then he says this to them. Before you Gentiles knew God, you were slaves to so-called gods that don't even exist. He's talking about these pagans, right? These people who previously weren't Jewish, they had no faith or anything. He says, but now that you know God, and I like what he says in parentheses there, or should I say now that God knows you, right? Why do you want to go back again and become slaves once more to the weak and useless spiritual principles of this world? So it's like he's saying right here, before you were Christians, you were slaves to sort of pagan principles. And now that you're Christians, why do you want to go backwards and become slaves to sort of spiritual principles of this world, useless spiritual principles of this world, that are institutional and based on rules and laws that can't save you? He says, don't do it. Don't go backwards and become these institutional Jews. That's kind of what he's saying here. He says, oh, my dear children, I feel as if I'm going through labor pains for you again, and they will continue until Christ is fully developed in your lives. Remember, Paul was their spiritual father, and so he's kind of using that language to say, I feel like you were already born, and now I'm having labor pains again for you, and it shouldn't have to be that way. You should be past this. You've already received the message. You've already received the gospel. Now live in it and move forward in it. Don't go backward to this slavery in Judaism, right? And then Paul is going to give them another example to try to help them to understand this and put this together. He says, the scriptures say that Abraham had two sons, one from his slave wife, Hagar, and one from his freeborn wife, Sarah. Now, I'll let you read this for yourself, but he's referring back to, the story of Abraham and Isaac and Ishmael. And what he's saying is this. Again, you can read this for yourself, but in essence, he's saying this. Here's the end of this chapter. Dear brothers and sisters, we are not children of the slave woman. We're children of the free woman. And because what was happening was this, God had given them a promise, Abraham and Sarah, you're going to have a kid, but it wasn't happening. And so they tried to force it to happen. And when they tried to force it to happen, Abraham took Hagar on and Ishmael was born. And they thought that was the child God was talking about. Turns out that wasn't the child. Years later, Sarah ends up getting pregnant by the grace of God, and this child, Isaac, is born, and this was the child of the promise. And this is what Paul is saying here. He's saying, listen, we are not children of the slave woman. Quit trying to save yourself. Quit trying to make God's promise happen by your power and strength. You need to trust that God did it through Jesus Christ. You need to be children of the free woman, like Isaac is the child of Sarah. It is totally God's work. When Abraham's body was as good as dead, God still did this incredible thing, and you guys were as good as dead because you can't keep the law well enough to be saved. And so you're saved by grace, and this is how it is supposed to work. So don't believe the message of the Judaizers. Anyway, again, that's a lot of information there, but that's what's happening in that chapter. And now you're ready to read Galatians 4. We'll see you tomorrow for chapter 5.